is, of course, a broadcaster, no stranger to this station, and Luke is a lawyer and writer. Great to have you back with us. Just a bit of a reaction to what Victoria Atkins was saying there. Luke, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think this inheritance tax issue is a massive own goal for Labour. And I don't think they anticipated the kind of backlash that they were going to get, because they brought this in alongside reforms to business property allowance. And I think both of those taxes were seen as sort of slightly apolitical nuances in the tax arrangements, which meant people were able to pass on property without being taxed. But what they failed to appreciate is that there are specific issues around farming, and for example, tenant farming, which means that these slight reforms can have catastrophic impacts, and that's what we've seen play out over the last few weeks. This has raised a pitiful amount of money in the wider budgetary concerns, and it's had a political impact that obviously hasn't been anticipated. So more power to the farmers' elbows, in my view. This represents a really positive pushback. A pushback against a Westminster elite that just don't appreciate how their apparent tinkering can impact on people's lives. And I think if Labour and the rest of the mainstream political parties should take anything from this, it's that to really think about how your policies influence areas that you might not know very much about. I think that's the big lesson that ought to be taken away here. It
sort of works for some people anyway, certainly for Treasury mandarins, it sort of works in theory, but the practice can be very difficult and different, Jonny, can't it?
It can be, Peter, and they've come to realise in a few short weeks that the conduct of opposition politics is very much different to the sword of Damocles that hangs over your head. They thought it was easy, and it reminds me a little bit of the Liz Truss budget, which saw her kicked out so fast. The fact that they thought that these policies, which are radical about shifts, volte-face, affect people so bitterly. And I think they perhaps should have anticipated that we live in a febrile atmosphere where protests are de rigueur. They're all over the place all the time. You walk into Oxford Circus in London most weekends, and there's a group of very scared people, the minority people in different communities, protesting for what they believe in. We don't actually always know what they're about because they're never in the news agenda. It's just things like the farmers' protests because it's got Clarkson there, and because it's the rural versus urban schism that we've seen for so many years. And obviously we see the pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel Hamas marches that go on week in, week out, every single week, that seem to only make the news. I think it would be incumbent upon the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, to stand up and say something like, this is Britain, we are a tolerant nation, we're one of the most tolerant nations in the world, put down your placards, you're okay, man, we're in the free world. It would be a good thing to do, because there are a lot of scared minorities in every sphere that are scared of other factions within society.
And you can actually say, you know, the farmers are, they're not an ethnic minority, but they are a minority.
They're a minority that aren't heard, are they?
Yeah, exactly, and they haven't been heard in this, and perhaps things will change, perhaps the government will rethink, but it doesn't look like that.
No.
Another thing where a lot of our viewers and listeners really want the government to think differently is on the winter fuel allowance. Story in the Mail on Sunday today, it says, shocking Labour hypocrisy. Liz Kendall, the Work and Pensions Secretary who axed the £300 payment to pensioners, lives in a £4 million Notting Hill home with her banker partner, and guess what? Winter Fuel Minister's heating bill is paid for by you. Now, there are a lot of MPs who have their their heating bill paid for by you, but the fact that she's the Work and Pensions Secretary, it's got to stick in the craw of quite a few people, Luke, isn't it?
Well, again, it's an example of this Labour government losing control of the narrative. And I do think that although Liz Kendall may not herself be a symptom of hypocrisy, because as you've said, this is quite a common practice throughout Parliament.
Although there will be people who won't know that and will be outraged by actually knowing that and learning that today, that we pay the heating bills of MPs for their second homes. Now, Victoria Atkins, who was on earlier, she says she doesn't claim it, and there will be a lot of MPs who don't. But actually, it is within the rules, and we you know, that's an echo of the expenses scandal in 2010.
Well, we're going to come on to talk about Starmer's apparent reset and the milestones, I think, in a while. But I think that this government
don't tease the listeners.
Don't tease. Well, okay, as exciting as it can get.
Exciting as it can be.
Yeah, I know. But you know, and Labour insiders are saying that this is not an attempt to reset the government's agenda and not an attempt to kind of start again in terms of their communications with the public. But I think it must be, mustn't it? Because it's these two big conflicts that have emerged in Labour's opening period in government. And no matter what you say, you know, about the detail of this, it's these stories that do cut through and do communicate. And that's Labour's huge problem at the moment, is one of communication. And Starmer is not a communicator, and his government aren't communicators. It's just trying...
Well, maybe on Thursday, Jonny, we'll hear all about the missions. Are you excited?
Well, it's nice to hear milestones as opposed to kilometre stones.
Good point, good point. Or indeed Edstones as well.
Edstones.
That didn't work too well.
No, Mr Miliband and his Edstone. No,
this is actually, the guy came up with that as now an MP. Actually, this is one of the weird sort of factoids I know about politics, because I'm a nerd and an obsessive. His name's Torsten Henriksen Bell, or as he now calls himself, Torsten Bell, and because he doesn't like to sound too posh, presumably. He's an MP for Swansea, and he's the person, the mastermind, who came up with the Edstone.
Well, congratulations to Torsten. Who knows, a plethora of reasons to congratulate him. But, I mean, if you ever wondered what voting Labour meant as an organisation of top-down, this is it. Labour aren't for the working people. There has been a complete shift in which party seems to be for the working people and which seems to be for the elite. And we're seeing it throughout the Western world. And here is an example of Liz Kendall. The least she can do is make an announcement and withdraw that part of her expenses, even if it is part of the expenses rules.
Surely all the calls would then be for every other MP to do the same thing. Should that happen?
Yeah, they should. I mean, there should be some ethics within this. And, you know, because journalists like us will be looking through the expenses claims forms, the least they can do is understand the pitfalls of doing such a thing. And if it means that the Commission looks into this kind of thing to produce a new threshold for expense claims, then this is the moment. But it is yet another example of what you do, of what happens when you vote Labour, who they represent, in my opinion.
Andy is in Catterick Garrison. He says, I'm in the army, I have to live in 2 places, and yet I have to pay my mortgage and pay for my room on the barracks, including heating and lighting. Very good point. Debbie in Horley says, maybe Rachel Reeves is property rich and cash poor like the farmers. Hypocrisy. Sharon says, I'll definitely be voting Reform UK. Paul says, I'm not sure that banging on about taxing farmers with multi-million-pound farms is going to go down well with urban voters. I think our food production in Britain needs a complete rethink. We are only producing 40% of our food, which makes me think we need bigger, more productive farms that generate profits to invest and modernise. Look at James Dyson's farms so we see what can be done. Food production needs to be done on a larger scale, not just as a cottage industry. Lots of thoughts coming in. Keep them coming. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me at 7222 with the word talk in your text. You can also send me a tweet at TalkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can send me a WhatsApp text message, as these people have done. Mark has done that. I've read out his message a little bit earlier on. Liz Kendall is a hypocrite, says Chris. Cut the winter fuel benefits, so no black hole for them getting their winter fuel, their heating paid for. They're wealthy. Labour are finished. This is an elite Labour Party. Roll on reform, he says. Sending his WhatsApp there. You can do the same with a voice note, actually. Send it to 0344 499 1000. Right. Luke Gittos and indeed Jonny Gould are still with me as my newsettes this morning. You've got a bonus. Don't worry, we are going to talk a little bit about Keir Starmer's missions, but not that much because it's really boring. But the bonus is that Luke and Jonny are going to stay on a little bit longer this morning until about 11:20, so that's good because there's loads to talk about. And the first thing I want to ask them about now is this sort of breaking news this morning, development in the big story about Greg Wallace. He has put a post on Instagram, lots of different allegations, including in the Sunday Times this morning from the Times radio presenter Asma Mir. She was on Celebrity MasterChef and says that he said certain things he shouldn't have said. She made a complaint about it, said it would be dealt with, and it clearly wasn't. This is what Greg Wallace has said this morning in reaction to all the allegations which he denies.
Now, I've been doing MasterChef for 20 years. Amateur, celebrity and professional MasterChef. And I think in that time, I have worked with over 4,000 contestants of all different ages, all different backgrounds, all walks of life. And apparently now, I'm reading in the paper, there's been 13 complaints in that time. Now, in the newspaper, I can see the complaints coming from a handful of middle-class women of a certain age just from Celebrity MasterChef. This isn't right. In 20 years, over 20 years of television, can you imagine how many women, female contestants on MasterChef, have made sexual remarks or sexual innuendo? Can you imagine?
So I suppose the point is, I mean, Greg Wallace having a say there on Instagram, he's not just accused of sexual remarks and sexual innuendos. He's accused of all sorts of things, including actually sexually assaulting people, groping people. That is sexual assault. And on one occasion, allegedly, dancing around the set wearing nothing but a sock on a part of his anatomy. It's also, I mean, he talks about the women, he says they're all sort of celebrities and people in the public eye. Well, actually, on the front page of the Sunday Telegraph, there's a woman called Georgia Harding, who's a producer. She worked on MasterChef between 2014 and 2015 and Eat Well for Less, another Greg Wallace programme. She is a member of a production staff, is saying that she actually raised concerns on Eat Well for Less about the way he treated contributors, but there appeared to be an acceptance of his behaviour and that nothing was done. It was like, oh, that's Greg, she said. Jonny, you're a media professional. Would you have put that video on Instagram?
It looks like he's angling for a payoff, isn't he? As Meatloaf, he's paraphrasing perhaps what Meatloaf might have said, which is 13 out of 4,000 ain't bad. He's done, isn't he? And this is a constant stream of male presenters. But I must tell you, I think this is the BBC's fault for persisting with a presenter for too long. They never, or they rarely look at their formats and think this needs freshening up.
But then when they do freshen things, I mean, we'll talk about all of this.
Yeah.
We've time to talk about all of this. But when they do freshen up formats, like Top Gear, the freshening up of after, you know, Jeremy Clarkson lamped a producer. That didn't work very well, did it?
No, it didn't. But I think he's sort of the Millwall of cooking, which is no one likes him and he don't care. I think he's done there, and we are seeing at the BBC persistent, unaccountable shows which go on and on and on and on, without actually looking at the audience out there and thinking, do you still watch this? What are the metrics of audience over many years? Let's talk about, I mean, we've seen Gary Lineker now, he's had his time up and we're going to have a very long slow burn sacking from him. He's going out in 2026.
Yeah, forgotten but not gone.
Maybe before, who knows? We've got that Have I Got News For You, which used to be so fresh, didn't it, in the 90s?
It's really boring now.
It's boring now.
Really boring.
And we have this chap there called Paul Merton, and he was hired, wasn't he, all those decades ago, because he was the young, sort of hip, you know, comedy is the new rock and roll kind of guy, against sort of the establishment character of Ian Hislop. And now they're both established.
I'm sure Ian Hislop would deny being an establishment candidate, but I know what you mean.
You know what I mean? Sort of he is anti-establishment in many ways, but he's part of the establishment anti-establishment, if you like.
Yes.
So Paul Merton was the crazy guy from South London, and now he's the same as him. And I think he really demonstrates kind of what the BBC is. It's on complete mission creep. It has these presenters that have gone on and on and on, and sooner or later they're going to be got at in the most visceral and nasty way. And Greg Wallace is done, I think, now.
Luke, you're a lawyer. From a legal perspective, if you're accused of these things,
you have to defend me.
Is the correct? I'm sure I'll give you a discount, Jonny. What would you have advised Greg Wallace to come out fighting like this? Or, I mean, this is the media age, and Greg Wallace may well say, as he has, like, all these allegations have been made against me. No one's heard from me. By the way, here I am.
I think it's a sick symptom of our times that these things play out in public. I think there is a case for the defence here, and I don't think that people's lives should be torn apart on the basis of allegations, no matter how many allegations there are. In our world, in the world of criminal justice, we're used to proving and insisting that things are proven beyond reasonable doubt before they change someone's life in a dramatic way. Sadly, over the last 10 years, since the onset of movements like the Me Too movement, before that the investigation into Jimmy Savile, all of those things were positive in some ways, but I think the other impact has been that we are now perfectly used to having pseudo-criminal investigations into people playing out in our national newspapers. We're used to accepting everything that's said about someone without any of it being tested. Now, of course, we are free as members of the public to form our own view about Greg Wallace and to believe the people that come forward and talk about him in this way. That's all perfectly acceptable. But what I think is really worrying is that as a society, people can have their lives torn apart on the basis of someone's word, and I think we need to rewind that.
But the point, I suppose, about this particular case, if you look at Asma Mir, the Times radio presenter, and we should say Times Radio is owned by the same company, they're in the same building as we are, and I know Asma Mir a little bit. I mean, she did raise this with Kate Phillips, who is a senior BBC executive who now oversees unscripted programmes, and was told, actually, OK, this shouldn't happen anymore. You know, I'll be told, I've now put in a system that I'll be told about this. But, I mean, not just Asma Mir, but actually a fellow contestant in Celebrity MasterChef, even before then, had raised these issues. They hadn't been dealt with clearly. And I mean, the people who are going public with this, surely they have a right to do that.
They do, and I think there are two questions, aren't there? The first is how the BBC dealt with these allegations, how the production company dealt with these allegations, and how it was allowed to go on for so long. That is an important question that needs to be explored. But there is another question here, which is, should Mr. Wallace have his reputation dragged through the mud on the basis of allegation alone? And as a society, we should be extremely worried about that, because even if these allegations turn out to be true, which we've got no reason to disbelieve them yet. We shouldn't be unreasonably sceptical of allegations, just as we shouldn't be unreasonably accepting of them. But let's assume that they are true. The proper forum for that to have played out is in a private setting where Mr. Wallace would be able to put his case privately. And what we're seeing on Instagram this morning, I think, is ugly and nasty. And, you know, he's made a comment about middle-aged women, which is unacceptable. But that should have happened in a private setting, so someone objective and impartial could have made a decision on it.